All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to decode the fundamental language of our nervous system. We're talking about the electrical signal that lets you think, feel, and move, the action potential. I mean, just think about it for a second. The speed is absolutely staggering. The impulse to move your hand travels from your brain to your fingertips in literally the blink of an eye. So how does that happen? Well, the answer lies in a tiny but incredibly powerful electrical event, firing millions of times a second inside you right now.
And that event is called the action potential. At its core, it's just a wave of electricity, a really brief, dramatic spike in a neuron's voltage that carries a message. This is the universal code that all of our nerves use to communicate.
Okay, this is a core principle you absolutely have to grasp. There is no such thing as a small action potential or a large one. A neuron either fires with its full maximum strength or just doesn't fire at all. Think of it like a light switch. It's either completely on or it's completely off. There's no in between. So, how does this electrical wave actually work? What are the mechanics behind it? Let's break it down into 4 key steps. We're going to follow the voltage change in the neuron from start to finish. So, before any signal is even sent, the neuron is just hanging out in its resting state. The inside of the cell is negatively charged, sitting at about minus 70 millivolts. You can think of this as the neuron being primed and ready. That negative potential is like a coiled spring, just holding on to energy that's waiting to be released. And this is the magic number, minus 55 millivolts. This is the threshold. If a stimulus is strong enough to push the neuron's internal charge up from minus 70 to this level, that all-or-none switch gets flipped. It is the absolute point of no return. The second that threshold is hit, it's like opening the floodgates. These special channels, called voltage-gated sodium channels, snap open. And because there's so much sodium outside the cell, positively charged sodium ions just flood into the neuron. This whole process is called depolarization. Now, the influx of all those positive sodium ions is so dramatic, so overwhelming, that the inside of the neuron doesn't just get back to zero. It actually shoots all the way up to about positive 30 millivolts. This is the absolute peak of the action potential. Okay, so at the peak, the cell needs to reset itself, and fast. The sodium channels slam shut, and a totally different set of channels opens up, this time for potassium. Now, positively charged potassium ions rush out of the cell, which causes the voltage to plummet right back down towards its negative resting state. Now, here's a cool little detail. These potassium channels, they're actually a bit slow to close. This causes a brief overshoot where the cell becomes even more negative than it was at rest. This little dip is called hyperpolarization, and it turns out to be a really crucial final step in the whole reset process.
So, the neuron has fired its signal. But what stops it from firing again immediately? Or what keeps the signal from going backward down the axon? Well, that's where the refractory periods come in. They act as this crucial built-in control system. First up, you have the absolute refractory period. Right after firing, it is physically impossible to trigger another action potential, no matter how strong the stimulus. Why? Because the sodium channels are temporarily inactivated. They're basically locked. Then, right after that, you get the relative refractory period. Here, it is possible to fire again, but it takes a much stronger stimulus than usual. This 2-stage system is the brilliant traffic cop that ensures the nerve impulse flows in one direction and one direction only.
We've seen how the spark is created, but how does that spark travel down the entire length of a nerve, which can be over a meter long sometimes, so incredibly quickly? The answer is all about how the signal is conducted. So, in nerves that are uninsulated, we call them unmyelinated, the signal has to trigger a new action potential at every single point along the way. As you can imagine, that's pretty slow. But many of our nerves are insulated with this fatty layer called a myelin sheath. Here, the signal literally jumps from one gap in the insulation to the next. These gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier. This jumping process is called saltatory conduction, and it is orders of magnitude faster. So, why do we need to know every little detail of this process? Why is it so important for anyone going into medicine? Because when any part of this elegant system breaks down, the results can be devastating. This is exactly where physiology meets clinical practice.
Have you ever wondered how a local anesthetic, like what you get at the dentist, actually works? The mechanism is beautifully simple. Drugs like lidocaine physically block those voltage-gated sodium channels we talked about. If sodium can't rush in, the neuron can't depolarize. If it can't depolarize, the action potential never starts. The pain signal is stopped dead in its tracks before it even gets going.
Now, let's consider what happens when that need for speed system fails. In diseases like multiple sclerosis, the body's own immune system tragically attacks that myelin sheath. Without the insulation, that super-fast saltatory conduction is impaired, and nerve signals slow way, way down. This leads to the wide range of debilitating neurological symptoms you see in MS.
Even a simple electrolyte imbalance can have massive consequences. Take potassium. If you have too much potassium in your blood, a condition called hyperkalemia, it actually raises the neuron's resting voltage, bringing it dangerously close to that -55 millivolt threshold. This makes nerves, especially the crucial ones in the heart, way too excitable, and that can lead to life-threatening cardiac arrhythmias.
Okay, let's do a quick rapid-fire review. These are the key points you've got to lock in. The threshold, -55 millivolts. Depolarization is caused by a sodium influx. Repolarization is caused by a potassium efflux. Remember, it's an all or none event. And finally, the refractory periods are there to keep the signal honest and make sure it flows in one direction.
So we've totally mastered how a signal travels down a single neuron. But of course, the nervous system is a huge network of neurons. And that brings us to our final critical question. How does this electrical message jump the gap from one cell to the next? Well, that's a story for another explainer.